Welcome back. Now to the 1960s, where nonviolent demonstrations like sit-ins at all-whites lunch counters were key for the civil rights movement. The Greensboro, North Carolina sit-in is one of the most notable ones, but often left out the history books, is the very first sit-in to create the jail, no bail movement. We now head to York County to learn about the story of the Friendship Nine. Throughout the South in the 1960s, segregation was the standard.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Many across the nation sharing that same twisted thought. Blacks and whites could not coexist.
Yeah, certain places you can go, certain things you could do and you couldn't do.
Those were the rules embedded into David Williamson as a young boy growing up in Rock Hill. At the time, legally, black and white people were to stay separate in everything, including housing, education, and even lunch.
And the only way you're going to bring about change, you got to be able to step out.
Students from Friendship College, a private historically black college in downtown Rock Hill, decided to be the change. In February of 1960, they began protesting segregation by sitting at whites-only lunch counters demanding service. This was a part of a bigger movement already spreading across the South in places like Greensboro, North Carolina.
It wasn't so much we wanted to eat there. We figured if we start at the lunch counter and make that change, then we can make other changes in the city.
At the end of the fall semester in 1960, more students at Friendship College joined in on the movement, preparing to organize a sit-in in a way that had not been done before. That's where the Congress of Racial Equality, also known as CORE, stepped in.
They took us through training classes, where you would sit at a counter like you in a classroom and somebody would throw stuff on there, hit you, stuff like that. Then if you fought back, then you got eliminated. You wouldn't be able to come downtown.
January 31st, 1961 would be the day. The protesters, 9 young, brave, and bold black men, John Gaines, Thomas Gaither, Clarence Graham, William Massey, Willie McLeod, Robert McCullough, James Wells, Mac Workman, and David Williamson marched downtown to McCrory's Five and Dime, Mr. Williamson sharing the story, sitting down with me in the exact chair at the exact lunch counter where he protested 63 years ago.
So when we came in and sat down, we didn't get a chance to order. You sit down like this, and the lady said, we don't serve it. And before she can get finished, they had to pull you off the counter and take you out.
Were the police very forceful with you? Did they hurt you?
When he was taking me out the back door, he slammed me into the door. We had to spend the night in the city jail. We went to court the next morning. And by that time, Lawyer Finney and the other lawyers had made it to town to defend us.
We have not yet met and decided whether or not the Citizens Committee will engage in any demonstrations whatsoever.
Ernest Finney Jr. was a recent graduate of State College's law school in Orangeburg, which is now known as South Carolina State University. Until its closing in 1966, State's law school was the only one in South Carolina that accepted black students.
My dad, along with dozens of highly trained lawyers, came out of that law school. Matthew Perry, Zach Townsend. So Orangeburg was teaching these young students how to go out in the world and to be people who could take the law and the teachings of the law and turn it into action.
Finney was so good that, man, the judge was impressed with him. And he come back and then he took his gavel and slapped down and said, $100 or 30 days. And Finney looked around and they said, we say, we're going to jail. He said, what? He said, they're going to jail.
At that moment, history was made not only in the South Carolina Civil Rights Movement, but the movement as a whole. You see, in other lunch counter protests, black demonstrators would sit down, get arrested, and then bail out of jail. But this group, they chose the opposite. Jail over bail, birthing an entirely new movement. They became known as the Friendship Nine. What was the significance of making that decision not to just pay that $100 fine like others had done in the past?
This way they had to feed us, take care of us for 30 days instead of paying the money.
This is the original recorder's docket from when the Friendship Nine appeared in court on February 1st of 1961. In it, you see all of their names, that they were found guilty of trespassing and sentenced to 30 days on the chain gang.
Well, it's like a prison camp. You know, they take you out and do road work. You could go to a landfill and fill up trucks with shovels.
The city of Rock Hill has opened an exhibit downtown showing the timeline of events from the sit-in. Mr. Williamson walked me through the halls, pointing out significant moments, including a letter Clarence Graham wrote to his parents while incarcerated, and the time all 9 men spent 3 days in one cell in solitary confinement.
It wasn't that big. We were sleeping on the floor, on concrete floor. I mean, they had no pillows or nothing like that.
For 72 hours straight, they were fed only stale bread and water until one of those days, an inmate slipped them a Baby Ruth candy bar.
And we cut it into 9 pieces, and man, you talking about something tasting good.
Their brutal jail conditions began to make national headlines, with telegrams sent to President John F. Kennedy and protesters near and far showing up to Rock Hill. This is footage from February 10, 1961, of protests outside of the whites-only establishments downtown, which included the lunch counter. 3 days later, civil rights activist John Lewis arrived. He lined the streets with black supporters who showed up in droves at the York County Prison for Visitation Day to see the Friendship Nine. Did you regret your decision?
Never.
On March 2, 1961, the Friendship Nine's 30-day sentence was complete, but the start of their new lives as black men in the South with criminal records was just beginning.
I wasn't able to get a job in Rock Hill, but when I went to New Jersey, because I went to New Jersey in 1962, and I had no problem getting a job. You fill out the application, you say, you've been to jail? Yeah. Then when they had the interview, they asked them what it was for, and you tell them. Nobody ever even questioned it.
Did you ever struggle with any of the things that you grew up going through?
Most of the time, like when I was in Georgia for 20 years, I never even talked about it. And I lived in Charlotte 25 years, never talked about it.
The irony is I was in this room, it was a different restaurant at the time, and I was being interviewed by a radio station, local station, and I saw this commotion going on in this restaurant, and I asked the person interviewing me, I said, what's going on? He says, well, it's a group of gentlemen that are celebrating their 50th anniversary. The first one I met was Mr. Graham, and I went up to him and I said, it is such an honor to meet you. I said, I don't know a lot about this story. I said, but I'm going to read everything I can find about it because it's an incredible story. And he said, well, I'm sorry, young lady, but there's not a whole lot written about us.
Kimberly Johnson, an author, set out the challenge to change that. For 3.5 years, she immersed herself in the Friendship Nine story, befriending them, researching and recording every detail she could. When she came across one specific part about their story that just blew her mind, the fact that more than 5 decades later, their convictions had not been cleared.
I was working at the King Center, and I had gone to the King Center to work under Dr. Bernice A. King, who's the last living daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King. She wanted to write a book. It took me still about 12 years for us to write the book because she got me engaged in other things that she was really doing, which was social justice and trying to understand what unjust laws look like. It sounded just like what was happening to the Friendship Nine.
And it was. Even as years flew by, activists in the civil rights movement often carried their criminal records into the 21st century. So Johnson posed this question to Dr. Bernice King.
How do you fix that? She goes, well, you can talk to your solicitor, you can talk to people in the judicial system and try to get it shifted.
We talked about how do we go about doing this in a way that undoes the convictions and vacates them off their record, but we don't want to expunge it.
And the difference between vacating and an expungement?
Vacating the conviction, we're taking them from a state of you're a lawbreaker to a state of you didn't break any laws with what you did. What you did was not illegal. Expunging then goes in afterwards and erases the record. One of my concerns was making sure that in the course of correcting the convictions that we didn't undo history.
54 years after the sit-in, the Friendship Nine found themselves back before a judge in this very courtroom, but this time it was for a different reason.
The defendant's convictions for trespassing in January of 1961 are vacated.
In a packed courthouse, January 28, 2015, after more than 5 decades, the Friendship Nine's convictions were cleared.
54 years later, we're proving you can't be successful.
This emotional correction in history was truly a full circle moment for a number of reasons. All 8 surviving members of the Friendship Nine were present, represented by Ernest Finney Jr., the same attorney who represented them in 1961.
Let the decision of the court today show the resolve of South Carolina to work together.
And the circuit court judge, John Hayes III, who made that 2015 ruling, was the nephew of the judge who sentenced the Friendship Nine to jail in 1961. To this very day, Mr. Williamson is still in awe that all of this happened.
Black, white, everybody was in there. You know, they were rejoicing on our behalf, and it's a great feeling.
What do you want people to remember about you and the Friendship Nine?
That we tried to make a difference. If nobody ever remember my name, if you remember the things we tried to do, you know, and that's what I